Refused to support my wife in claiming our son fathered his ex-girlfriend's baby, causing her to accuse me of denial. Our son had just turned 16 when his girlfriend, who's 16, almost 17, broke up with him. It had only been about a month since their split when, out of nowhere, her parents dropped the bomb: she's pregnant. And she's already starting to show. The timing fit exactly with when our son and she were dating, which sent my wife and me into absolute panic mode. For 2 days, we walked around with this knowledge, debating what to do before finally sitting down to tell our son. He had no clue. The second the word pregnant escaped my lips, he snapped, "It's not mine. I never fucked her." At first, I didn't buy it. I know he's active. Earlier he'd come to me, sheepish but pragmatic, asking for protection, and he's requested restocks a few times. Still, he swore up and down they'd never had sex. He kept repeating it, quietly fuming, then told us he'd cheated on her. That's when we had one of those classic father-son, heart-to-heart talks. He's an absolute shithead, no point sugar-coating that, but as I sat across from him, watching how angry and adamant he was, I found myself beginning to believe him. He was insistent, he always used protection, and, again, they'd never gone all the way. But my wife wouldn't budge. So, both families met up, thick tension in the room. My wife started the conversation as if it was a plain fact that our son was the dad and was already outlining possible solutions, how we'd fund everything, what would happen next. Our son cut her off, absolutely livid, insisting again, "It's not my baby. We never had sex." He was red-faced, practically shaking, and then he dropped the detail that cracked the room open. Apparently, they only ever did a very specific act that, biologically, can't result in a baby. He said it just wasn't working for him, so he'd never gone further with her. My wife and I raged at him, mostly because the way he described it painted him as a complete asshole. But in that moment, I believed him. His ex-girlfriend didn't push back much. She admitted what he said was mostly true, but she described a particular encounter in detail, and honestly, it sounded plausible. I know the kind of person my son is, an absolute liar at times, a dog in many ways, but even with all that, sitting there, I knew he was telling the truth this time. But my wife? She was furious with me. She said I was falling into the boy culture, refusing to hold him accountable and worsening the whole situation by living in denial. She reminded me how children born to teen parents are more likely to become teen parents themselves, and pointedly, we were both 17 when we had our son. She threw up her hands and said she'd have to handle further meetings and make the tough calls, since I apparently wasn't grounded in reality. So, I stepped back. I refused to engage in more talks with her family until we had actual proof, until we could know without doubt if he was truly the father. I know this sounds like a scattered rant, but I needed to let all of this out somewhere. I just needed to vent. Update 1. I found out about damning text messages that seemed to back up my son's ex's story. Explicit stuff she sent to a friend around the time everything happened. She talked about my son's large and marked organ, even described the type of sex they had. These messages lined up with what she was claiming and went well beyond the just oral account my son was sticking to. My wife seemed almost triumphant about it, which only made things worse. Without telling me, my wife went ahead and invited the ex and her family over for another meeting. I walked into chaos. It was carnage. The three of us, my wife, my son, and me, sat on one side of the table. My son wouldn't even begin until he made his mother switch to the other side. When she finally did, our son just sat there, quiet as a whisper, until he finally spoke. He admitted to having the mark, admitted being large, something I could have gone my whole life without knowing, but he insisted there was no actual sex, just oral. Then, like he was possessed, he started winking at his ex's mother. When she questioned it, my son shot off, "Your husband's gayer than Philip Schofield, so I'm sure you'd like a go on my large." He turned to his ex's dad, who isn't even named Philip, and followed it with a gay slur. I was speechless, shell-shocked by the grotesque circus my family had become. My wife rounded on our son, told him to just stop denying it, and began to scheme out loud again. I told everyone I still wanted a DNA test, preferably now, but at the very latest, at birth. The others insisted on waiting until birth. That was when my son, out of nowhere, snapped. He laid it down. If we didn't get the test done now, he'd refuse testing until he finished college, which could be another 6 years. He pointed out that the courts wouldn't expect maintenance from a kid anyway, and by the time it was sorted out, the woman who gave birth to him, he called his own mother that, would have wasted money and love on a child unrelated to her. He finished, coldly saying he hoped watching it all unravel would push my wife, his own mother, into a truly dark place. The ex and her family tried to threaten a court order, but my son was confident. Apparently, there was some autonomy clause. He was right. As he left, his mother grabbed his arm, desperate, and he sharply told her to get her dirty hand off me, threatening to fight her if she didn't let go. I told her to let him go. He left, saying he'd stay at a friend's place. He'd been staying there more and more lately, barely at home anymore. I went out after him and offered to drive him. He agreed, quiet all the way. In the car, he said he knows I don't believe him anymore, but insisted again, he didn't fuck her. He told me school is hell, social media is a nightmare, and as for your wife, he refused to call her mum, she's a b. TCH. I tried to correct him, You can't talk about your mom like that, but he fired back that she's just a woman who gave birth to him and cared for him, nothing more. He said she's never once asked how he's coping, never checked if he was okay. When we got to his friend's place, he broke down, crying a little. He told me it had nothing to do with me, but he wouldn't be home much anymore, then asked if maybe, even so, I'd still hang out with him. His friend's father saw me, started chatting. I was about to offer him some money since my son has been there so much, but he refused, said my son had told him everything. He happens to be a counselor, too. He said he's known my son since he was tiny and believes him. Oddly enough, he suggested he might have more information than even I do. No clue what that meant. But he warned me, flat out, keep going like this and we are going to lose our son for good. When I finally dragged myself home, I told my wife, one word to me or our son about that baby without a DNA test and we are finished. If she doesn't apologize and beg forgiveness from our son in the next few days, we're done. I meant it. It wasn't just a heat of the moment threat. Judging by her reaction, though, we really could be over. I still love her, we go back to childhood, but my son comes first. This isn't even about believing him or not at this point, it's about being there for him. He's always been a troublemaker, but now his behavior is erratic, desperate, almost as if he's begging for help, and how quickly he's changed is terrifying. All that matters right now is him. Counseling, and as much of it as I can get for him. Update 2. My wife and I separated, but we're still on good terms, trying to make the best of a difficult situation. I think she understands why I finally decided to move out, but we're definitely handling things differently. These days, I live in a flat with my son, and honestly, he seems so much happier now. I can see a weight has been lifted off his shoulders. There's actually some good news for once. Last Thursday, his ex's parents agreed to a paternity test. I have no idea what brought on this sudden change of heart, but the test is all set for this Wednesday, and I'm hoping it brings the truth out in the open. When I told my son that her parents had finally agreed, he surprised me by asking to meet with his ex and her parents, just to apologize. He wanted to thank her parents and apologize for the way he'd spoken to them before. To their credit, they graciously accepted his apology. Deep down, I feel like he deserved an apology too, considering everything, but I kept that to myself. Then he turned to his ex and told her, straight up, that he wasn't trying to start a fight, but they both knew the baby wasn't his. She still insisted it was. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Later, I asked my son if maybe he wanted to apologize to his mother too, or at least have a real conversation about everything. He shot me down, said he'd never apologize to her, and that even if she apologized to him, he'd never forgive her. He told me flatly that he hates her and always will. That's still an utter mess. He won't speak to her at all. If she drops by our flat for any reason, he packs up and leaves before even seeing her. Saturday night, I sat him down for a serious talk. I told him that I wouldn't be angry if he'd been lying to me about anything, but that I'd rather hear the truth from him than from the DNA test. Once again, he swore it isn't his. Moments later, he asked me to promise I wouldn't get mad if he told me the truth, whatever it might be. He told me he doesn't like labels, but the reason nothing ever went further with his ex is that he can't stay up with girls, and although he always carries condoms, he doesn't actually use them with girls. Before I could even respond, he got up and went to bed. The following morning, I made sure to tell him, I'm fine with him, whatever or whoever he is. It caught me off guard, but I couldn't let him doubt my support. I did have to ask about something else that had been eating at me, the Philip Schofield comment he made about his ex's dad. He shot that down immediately, said nothing like that ever happened, and that it was actually a guy his own age, nothing to do with her dad. I didn't press him any further. He's asked me to keep all of this quiet, so here I am, getting it all off my chest in the only way I can. At this point, honestly, it would be a shock if this baby turns out to be his. Update 3. I spent £800 on the test just last Wednesday. I couldn't help but watch him closely. He didn't seem nervous at all. Actually, he was almost happy. Everything went smoothly, or so I thought. Then, Thursday morning came and I woke up to find him gone. All I had was a text. He needed a break for a few days. Confused and on edge, my wife called me. Apparently, his ex was also missing. She got the same message as I did. My mind was racing as I texted him and rang his phone over and over with no answer. Finally, a video call came through. There he was, and his ex was with him. That's when he hit me with the truth. He admitted it, he lied about everything. The test will probably prove the baby is his. He told me where they were staying, saying they wanted to talk things through on their own, without adults getting involved. I admit, I was wrong about him. He'd lied, right to my face, and I felt utterly betrayed. My wife, even after everything, stayed humble. Her parents and my wife both think that maybe, just maybe, it's a good thing to let them talk it out on their own. They're keeping in touch. Maybe I'm just too mad, but letting them handle this alone seems absolutely nuts to me. Then again, maybe it is for the best. As for me, I'm done. I honestly don't know what else could come from this. Update 4. My son came home Monday evening and, right away, things exploded between him and his mother. I wasn't even there, it all went down while I was at work. The same angry words as always, slamming right into each other. My son stormed out, straight to his friend's house, needing that distance. Later that evening, my wife and I started getting some messages. My son was back on social media, and this time, he came out publicly, official, with his boyfriend. All at once, the air at home shifted, as if every secret and suspicion had been dragged into the light for everyone to see. On Wednesday, her parents finally got the DNA results. We'd all agreed, the email wouldn't be opened unless we were all together. But nothing ever goes to plan. My son hugged his ex, and the two of them acted so close, so intimate. Watching them together, the way they leaned on each other and whispered, I could feel a raw annoyance burning inside me. I hated it, couldn't even explain why. Maybe it was jealousy, or fear, or just the feeling of being pushed out of the loop in my own house. Then the results came in. He wasn't the father. Everything built up to that one anticlimactic moment. My son turned to his mom and, with a cold edge, told her that every parent seemed like a real parent except for her. His words seemed to hit her like a physical slap. He said he could have done something irreversible, something that would have been the end, and he was sure she wouldn't have cared, maybe would have actually cheered. It was raw, and cruel, graphic enough that it made me shudder. The room broke into chaos, questions flying about who the real father was. And my son just shrugged it off, saying the baby was gone, so the actual father simply didn't matter anymore. Her dad was glaring at him, fists clenched, and I had to step in between them, acting as the only barrier keeping things from turning violent. I told my son to leave, he needed distance, and he didn't hesitate, taking his ex with him. When I finally came home, the scene that greeted me tapped into a deeper rage. They were both curled up together on the couch, holding each other as if nothing and no one else in the world mattered. The anger boiled inside me. I was furious. I pulled him aside, no shouting, just the two of us. He stuck to his story, that he never slept with her, couldn't even get it up, and the whole abortion was the right thing to do, for reasons only they seemed to understand. Apparently, it was all her decision. She'd arranged 2 doctors' signatures before he'd so much as lifted a finger. Later, she admitted it when I confronted her directly, their messages over the past 2 weeks confirming everything. It looked like she'd asked for his help in exchange for the DNA test. The whole weekend getaway, now it made sense. That was her reason. She's gone home now, and I have no idea how that's unfolding for her. Poor girl, she's only just started facing the real fallout. Meanwhile, my son refuses to talk to his mom, shutting her out entirely. I could go deeper into the he said, she said, could dig into all the ugly details, but honestly, I'm just completely drained. I don't think any of this is fully registered for me. The only thing I feel right now is exhaustion. Update 5. I thought the email was the ending. Friday morning proved me wrong. I was halfway through a coffee when the school rang. Head of year, clipped voice, can you come in now? When I walked into reception, my son was perched on a plastic chair with an ice pack pressed to his cheek, shirt untucked, knuckles grazed. He looked at me, amusement flickering across his face before it collapsed. 2 lads had cornered him behind the canteen and gone for him. One filmed it. The caption making the rounds was baby killer. The pastoral lead kept saying safeguarding and police liaison in the same breath. My phone was vibrating in my pocket, wife ringing over and over. I let it go. They moved us into a meeting room. He kept cracking jokes he didn't mean, that horrible lightness he uses when he's hanging by a thread. Then the door opened and his boyfriend, the one from the post, walked in. It wasn't a stranger. It was the counselor's son. The boy he'd been staying with, the house I'd driven him to in the dark. He came straight over and took my son's hand like that was the most normal thing in the world. My son's shoulders finally dropped. The counselor stood behind them, steady as a lamppost, gave me this look like, here we are. Suddenly the comment he made months ago, I might know more than you, landed with a thud. Before the police liaison could get her pen out, it escalated again. The ex's mom appeared in the doorway, white-faced, saying her daughter had had a panic attack in the girls' toilets, and behind her, the ex's dad shouldered in, loud and red and already pointing. He called my son a murderer and a few other things I won't repeat. Somewhere down the corridor a bell was going and kids were peering around doorframes like meerkats. The counselor's voice cut across it all, low as a warning. Security arrived. The ex's dad jabbed a finger at my face and I thought that was it, but the police liaison had him out the door before I needed to find out if I had a fight left in me. They brought the ex into the same room once he was gone, still pale and damp around the eyes, and asked if she felt safe. She nodded. Then she looked at me, not my son, and asked if she could talk to me alone. The counselor stayed, the boys stepped out. She said, very quietly, that she didn't want my son dragged anymore, that whatever anyone said, he'd been kind when everyone else had been cruel. She said the father was someone else, an older boy she'd been seeing in secret from a part-time job, and that it had got messy. Not a teacher, not a neighbor, nothing like that, but older, 19, maybe 20, someone who said he'd ruin her if she breathed his name. She said she'd told my son because she knew he'd keep his mouth shut and take the heat if he had to. She said she asked him to come with her for the procedure and he did, and he held her bag while she signed alone. She asked me not to repeat the name she finally whispered. I won't. By home time the video had spread. I drove my son to A&E to glue the cut on his cheek because the school nurse said it might scar. He kept turning his head towards the window so I wouldn't see he was crying. The boyfriend sat in the back and didn't let go of his hand at the traffic lights. In the waiting room he wiped a smear of blood off my son's chin with his sleeve and my son laughed properly for the first time in weeks. Bloody and ridiculous and 16 again. That's how I met him properly. He introduced himself, eyes straight on mine, and asked if I was okay. When we got back to the flat that night there was a folded takeaway menu shoved under the door with MU Durer scrawled across it in biro and a little smiley face drawn in the O. The sugar glass clink in your head when your body thinks it's danger. I checked the peephole twice before I opened the door to fetch it. My son snatched it off me, read it, then put it in the bin and turned the music on too loud, and I let him, because it was the only thing that stopped his hands shaking. At about 11 there was banging, my wife, mascara down her face, swearing she'd only had 2 wines, asking to see him, only wanting to talk. He shut his bedroom door and turned his back. I walked her down to a taxi and she asked if I was happy now, if this was what boys' club looked like. Then she grabbed my jacket, apologized into my shoulder, and asked if I thought he'd ever forgive her. I had nothing to give her. The cab light went on and she was gone. Saturday morning the counselor rang, telling me the school had issued suspensions to the 2 lads who hit my son, that the police had cautioned the ex's dad for the scene, and that if we wanted to go through with a formal complaint they'd back us. My son said no, he didn't want to be that guy, he wanted it to stop. The ex messaged me later saying she'd given a statement about the older boy. I've never hated the word consensual more in my life than reading it typed by a teenager trying to cover a grown man who knew exactly what he was doing. Sunday we had dinner at the counselor's house. Their kitchen smelt like garlic and laundry powder and teenage boy. The boyfriend's mom told me about a poem my son had written for English that made her cry and I sort of sat there with a fork in my hand and realized I hadn't heard my son speak about anything that wasn't disaster in 3 months. He and the boyfriend disappeared to the garden and I could see them from the window, hoodies up, knees knocking together, heads tipped inwards like birds. The counselor poured me tea and said, "You're allowed to like him, you know." I said, "I do." He nodded and said my wife had rung him, asked for a referral. He'd recommended someone. I didn't know what to do with the relief and the anger sitting in the same chair. Monday morning a police officer took a statement from me about the note and the lads at school. In the afternoon, the ex's mum came by to thank my son. She looked older than she did last week. She said she'd asked her husband to leave the house for a while, that she'd found messages on his phone to some bloke from the pub, and that maybe her house had been breaking for a long time before our kids smashed it. She handed my son a bag of jelly babies and told him that, in another life, she'd have wanted him as a son. He took the bag, then hid in the bathroom and cried into his sleeve so quietly I wouldn't hear. The boyfriend knocked once and went in and that was that. 2 silhouettes pressed together in a mirror I pretended not to notice. My wife texted to say she'd written a letter for him. I left it on his bedside table. He hasn't opened it. I didn't push it. He did, however, print a photo of the 3 of us from a holiday years ago and stick it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a dolphin. It's nothing, it's everything. He came to me after midnight, leaned on the doorframe and said, "Will you come to parents' evening with me?" Then, after a beat, "And can you meet his mom properly? Please." I said yes. So no, it wasn't the ending. It's the bit where the noise doesn't stop but you start to hear other things through it. The kettle boiling, boys laughing on a cold lawn, my wife saying help instead of fix. I'm not done. He's still here. That's all I've got and it turns out it's a lot. Update 6. Parents' evening was Tuesday and the school smelt like polish and chip fat, that warm, sad secondary school smell that never leaves your clothes. My son walked beside me with his hood up even though we were inside, eyes at the floor, and the boyfriend hovered behind us carrying 2 bottles of Rubicon like offerings. We did English first. His teacher had a folder already open and a post-it on a poem called Fairy. It wasn't about fairies, not really. It was about standing still while the water moved and the ropes burned your hands anyway. She read 2 lines out loud and I had to stare at the neon fire exit sign until I could swallow properly. She said, "He's good. He's tired, but he's good," and my son turned his mouth sideways like he was trying not to let a smile escape. Maths was numbers and concern and phrases like reduced timetable. The head of year asked if mornings only might help, a soft landing, and mentioned a managed move to a partner school with fewer bodies in corridors. My son looked at me, at the boyfriend, back at the carpet, and said, "Not yet." We took a bench by the trophies to breathe. The counselor and his wife appeared out of nowhere like decent ghosts with a Tupperware of lemon drizzle and 2 umbrellas. She hugged me like she'd known me for years and told me not to be weird about cake. On the way out, under those brutal strip lights in the car park, the ex's dad was leaning on a railing. I braced, but he only held up both hands and said, "Quiet, I was wrong." He looked small without his anger, like it had been keeping him inflated. He said he was staying at his sister's, that he'd told the manager he needed time off, that he'd said sorry to his daughter and she'd stared past him like he was a window. Then, almost as an afterthought, he told me he'd borrowed a certain older boy from the pub when he saw him grinning at the fruit machine and his hands started shaking so badly he had to hide them in his pockets. He didn't say the name. Neither did I. He cried hard once, like a slip of water over rock, and then wiped his face like he had a train to catch and left without looking back. That would have been enough, But life refuses to do tidy arcs. Wednesday evening I stopped at the supermarket for milk and paninis and found him without trying, leaning on the trolley bay, trainer on the lower bar, that older boy face that's still boy but starting to wear a man like a borrowed jacket. He flicked his eyes over me, clocked me, and smiled like a dare. I didn't say his name. I said, "Leave her alone," and he rolled his neck and laughed. Something slick. He said, "Tell her to watch her mouth," and touched his phone like it was a knife. I lifted mine and told him I was filming, when really it was just the black screen and my own face looking back at me, and he stepped in close enough that I could see a pimple healing on his chin and the amber flecks in his eyes. Store security didn't like that at all. We all did the British shuffle of pretending we weren't in a scene until a man with a badge and a shaved head asked if there was a problem. The boy snapped something soft and ugly and went, quick, the way rats go, engine whining as the scooter carried him off. I wrote down the plate on a receipt with my shopping list under my thumb, hands shaking so badly the 8 looked like a snowman. When I got home and my son pretended not to watch me from the sofa, I sent the plate, the version of the truth I could tell, and every nasty screenshot the ex had forwarded me to the officer who'd taken our first statement. It felt like dropping stones into water, one by one, and listening for a splash that didn't belong to me. Thursday afternoon the therapist's office smelled like peppermint and carpet cleaner. My son sat by the window with his knee juddering at a speed that didn't match his face. He'd opened my wife's letter at some point in the night. When I picked his hoodie off the floor that morning, the envelope was under it with the crease down the middle like a held breath, and he'd texted her one line, "You can come if you sit by the door." She did. She came in pale, without mascara, hands empty, and sat on the chair nearest the exit like she was respecting fire code. The therapist asked who wanted to speak first and my wife looked at our son and said, "I'm sorry I chose the version of you that made sense to me." He didn't reply for a long time. Then he said, perfectly polite, "You called me a liar and I became one," and the therapist's pen stopped. My wife folded at the stomach in a way I'd never seen before. He let her put her hand on his sleeve and didn't pull away for 5 seconds, which is nothing and also a cathedral. On the way down the narrow stairs he lifted her bag when it knocked against her knee. She stayed on the pavement with her face tipped up to the weak sun like she was warming something back to life, and he went home with me quiet as a ghost, sat on the kitchen counter swinging his legs while I made pasta, then ate like he hadn't in days. That night the boyfriend stayed over with a wash bag and a t-shirt that said something about a tour he'd never been to. No conversation, just a glance at me that asked and my nod that answered. I said something about the door being open and my son rolled his eyes like a 3-year-old who just learned the word privacy, and then they were in his room, 2 shadows and a lamp. At 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of them laughing at something stupid, that deep, helpless, teenage laughter that sounds like coughing. They made toast badly and I pretended not to notice the butter knife left to congeal in the sink. Breakfast was shy and cheerful like a dog that's been told it's allowed on the sofa. By Friday lunch the police rang. The officer's voice on the line was clipped like it had somewhere else to be, but there was a different weight in it. They'd picked the older boy up for an unrelated matter and would I be willing to confirm my sighting at the supermarket, as part of a harassment complaint. Unrelated matter turned into words like possession and failure to appear, and I found myself sagging against the washing machine with my hand on a tea towel watching the drum spin. I met them, said the things I could say, didn't say the name I promised not to, signed my signature in a box that made my own name look unfamiliar. On my way out, I saw the ex's mom on a bench outside the station with a paper cup of tea, 2 sugars judging by the paleness, and she patted the space next to her like we were old neighbors waiting for a bus. She said, "I told them everything." It felt like losing a tooth that was already loose. Then, out of nowhere, she asked if I thought I'd be a granddad one day, and I said yes, because I still wanted that, because I could admit that out loud and not feel like I was picking a side. Saturday afternoon there was football on the telly with the sound down and my son on the floor building a flat-pack desk with a boyfriend, studs of screws in his mouth like silver teeth. He asked me where the spirit level was and I laughed until I remembered I actually had one. My wife texted a photo of a lake and said, "I went for a walk," and then, "Thank you for not giving up on him when I did." I sent back a thumbs up and deleted it and wrote, "We're trying," instead. Later, my son opened the freezer and found a Tesco bag of ice and said, with his voice like he was testing out a new language, "Mom always used to buy the posh ice," and then he put the door back to and stared at it like it was a portal and sat down. He took the letter from the bedside table and folded it into the back of his phone case. He didn't say he forgave her. He didn't say anything. He scraped butter over toast and left me the end of the loaf because he knows I like the crusts. The dolphin magnet on the fridge somehow has a second photo under it now, my son and the boyfriend in the counselor's garden, heads together, the wash line behind them like a bunting of ordinary things, and I stood there with my cup of tea and understood why people hang pictures of saints. The house was small and messy and terribly alive. I don't know if we're safe. I don't know if the noise will ever stop. But when the kettle clicked off my son shouted, "Dad, bring the biscuits," and I did, and it felt like stepping into the right room.